Tonight, dear listeners, we shall quietly journey into the intricate and perhaps subtly fragrant world of the medieval inn. This was a place where tired travelers found curious concoctions, where ale flowed freely alongside various tiny companions, and where a good portion of the night was spent gently pondering if the sounds from above were peaceful slumber or something more profound. Before you settle in, if you feel so inclined, a gentle tap on the like button and a quiet subscription would be appreciated, but only if what I create here brings you genuine calm. And perhaps, in the comments below, share where you are listening from and what time it is for you. It is always a quiet wonder to consider our global audience. Now, dim the lights, perhaps let a fan softly hum in the background, and let us slowly drift into tonight's historical embrace. The innkeeper doesn't quite awaken with a start. Rather, he is gently stirred by the faint sound of a sneeze finding the floorboards beneath his room, followed by a soft groan, a light thud, and the unmistakable, though distant, flutter of a chicken quietly slipping out through the front door once more. He opens a single eye. The world outside remains dark, which means it is either far too early or far too late. In the medieval rhythm of time, there is seldom a middle ground. He rises slowly, as if gently separating from a comfortable surface, and softly clears the sleep from his face with a sleeve that once held the texture of fine linen but now possesses the gentle wear of an old saddlebag. His bed is simply comfortable. A straw mattress, gently sloped, covered by a blanket that holds the soft scents of garlic and yesterday's ale. It offers a quiet comfort, much like a slightly damp cloak might, if one does not inquire too deeply. He dresses in a sequence of movements. First the tunic, then the trousers, followed by his belt, once it is located. After a brief, quiet search, he finds it hanging on a peg behind the door, nestled with a spoon, a small candle remnant, and someone's forgotten sock. He chooses not to wonder whose. Asking questions before the first light of dawn is a gentle oversight. Below, the common room rests in an unnerving quiet. Hints of life remain. A tilted mug, a single boot near the warmth of the hearth, a man softly snoring beneath a table, settled with the ease of one accustomed to such slumbers. The innkeeper steps carefully around him. Waking guests too soon often invites rather direct, whispered conversations. He tends to the hearth with a calm, practiced movement of the poker. The aim is a gentle warmth, not a roaring fire. Firewood holds value, and the last time a true blaze was encouraged, someone attempted to roast a goose indoors, still adorned with its feathers. As he places a pot over the quiet flames, preparing to warm whatever yesterday's stew has become, he hears the distant, soft call of a mule and the quiet arrival of early travelers. He breathes out gently. The inn, though not grand, is warm, active, and most importantly, it is his own. And with that quiet rhythm, the day begins anew. Morning sustenance at the inn is less a meal and more a quiet negotiation between what is readily available and what is easily consumed. The innkeeper gently ladles a thick portion of something into a pot above the hearth. It does not possess a specific name, but it carries a gentle aroma, somewhere between simple oats and the earthy scent of a damp boot that has quietly considered cabbage. This is pottage, a medieval staple, more of an enduring concept than a precise recipe. Yesterday's pottage was made with barley and turnips. Today's still includes those same turnips, now softer, along with a few mysterious fragments from a goose that did not manage its escape last night. Add water, warm gently, and repeat. It is like soup that paused midway. The bread is present, firm like a roof tile and similarly demanding to chew. It is sliced with a quiet care, mostly because the innkeeper prefers not to dull another blade on it. Guests chew it slowly, partly for proper digestion, and partly because there is ample time for quiet reflection between each bite. And the ale? Oh yes, the morning ale. It is not merely a medieval image. It is a gentle necessity. The local water can be uncertain. Milk is often reserved for the Lord's barn cat, and tea is still a distant whisper in a far-off merchant's thoughts. The ale is mild, but at least it has been warmed and gently refined through quiet resolve. Even the children partake with gentle guidance, of course. This is, after all, a place of quiet respectability. By now, guests are slowly entering one by one. A merchant with a coin purse held gently like a cherished relic, a weary pilgrim still clutching his walking stick and murmuring softly about tired feet. And, as always, the bard who requests honey for his porridge as though honey has not been tucked away for weeks. The barmaid, moving with calm agility and a gentle immunity to trivialities, drifts between the tables like a dancer who has found a quiet composure. She offers soft smiles to the patrons, quietly refills mugs, and gracefully avoids unwanted remarks with the ease of one who has gently anticipated every possible verse a sleepy traveler might offer. By the close of the morning meal, the inn holds the soft sense of smoke, barley, and quiet aspiration. Empty bowls settle gently onto tables. Stomachs are pleasantly full, spirits are comfortably warm. It is not a grand repast, but it is comforting, it is sustaining, and no one has yet encountered a final rest, which by medieval considerations is a quiet success. If there is one thing a medieval inn does not require more of, it is people. Yet by mid-morning, they begin to arrive in a steady flow, like pigeons carrying small bundles and showing a similar gentle regard for personal freshness. The first through the door is a knight, or rather, someone claiming the title of knight. He possesses armor, yes, but it is mismatched, softly rusted, and held together with what appears to be a piece of curtain rope. He quietly requests a private room, despite possessing no coin, no discernible manners, and the gentle aroma of a horse that recently lost a wager. Behind him is a merchant's apprentice who speaks as if he commands a vast fleet but offers buttons for payment. He attempts to bargain gently over a bowl of soup as though this establishment offers special arrangements. Then comes the bard, a different one this time. He never actually offers payment but quietly insists that his songs hold more value than gold. They do not. He carries a lute, quietly missing 6 strings, and immediately begins a soft, melancholic melody about forgotten affection and minor livestock mishaps. No one has requested this. A monk gently shuffles in next, offering solemn nods to all and quiet blessings to the furniture. He softly insists on observing a quiet fast while subtly eyeing the bread. Within a gentle 10 minutes, he is consuming the said bread and softly explaining that, technically, it is not a transgression if the loaf was already divided. By the quiet hour of noon, the inn is filled with gently blending personalities and overlapping gentle scents. Someone is softly drying their socks near the hearth. Someone else is quietly sharpening a knife for no clear purpose. A child softly moves between tables, followed by a goose with a minor, lingering grievance. In the far corner, 2 travelers engage in a soft dispute over who will occupy the only stool that does not gently sway. And overseeing it all is the innkeeper, as calm as a monk on a day of quiet abundance. He has seen these gentle patterns before. He knows that by evening, a gentle affection will blossom, someone will quietly doze into their stew, and someone will challenge a stool to a soft encounter. Likely the bard once more. He pours another mug, gently wipes the counter with a cloth that has seen many quiet centuries, and offers a subtle nod to the barmaid. A silent understanding that despite all, this place continues its gentle rhythm. The guests may be unpredictable, softly vocal, occasionally displaying minor injuries, but they are also what gives the inn its gentle pulse, and he would not have it any other way, save for a bit more quiet and fewer gentle goose pursuits. If the inn possesses a quiet core, or at least a smoothly functioning presence, it resides with the barmaid. Her name is Marjorie. She appears to be around 20, perhaps 30, or perhaps she has simply matured gently from exposure to traveling poets. No one knows for certain. What is quietly understood is that the entire operation would softly settle into a stew-scented calm without her steady presence. She moves through the gentle disarray with practiced grace, one hand softly balancing a tray of mugs, the other gently deflecting a wandering hand that misjudged her quiet patience. Her movements are swifter than a ferret in a peaceful pantry. A soft-spoken mercenary once attempted to admire her ankles and awoke 2 days later with his boots gently suspended from the ceiling. Marjorie can gently take an order in 4 distinct ways of speaking, pour ale without a single misplaced drop, and quietly offer a gentle remark to a noble without technically inviting royal disapproval. She is not abrupt, she is simply efficient, and in a structure held together by gentle splinters and quiet understandings, She is the sole presence of quiet authority. She knows which travelers will offer honest coin and which will attempt to barter with seashells. She can subtly detect a false tone, a borrowed adornment, and a gentle flirtation disguised as a comment on the fare. The monk may softly murmur about virtue, but even he acknowledges Marjorie as the quiet guardian of smooth operation. Her day begins before the first light of dawn and concludes long after the fire gently diminishes. During this time, she will quietly serve stew, gently guide children, soothe a scraped knee, and somehow find the quiet moments to refill every mug in the room, often while softly avoiding falling utensils or calming a gentle disagreement about the ownership of a goat that wandered in during the noon meal. And yet, she never allows the tray to falter. That is the gentle wonder of it. Marjorie does not officially manage the inn, but in the quiet rhythm of daily life, it is her peaceful domain. The innkeeper may hold the title to the walls, but she guides the pulse of the common room. A subtle glance here, a soft word there, a gaze that can gently cool a heated discussion. It is a delicate ballet, and she performs it daily with the kind of quiet elegance that only arises from years of gentle expectations and profound tolerance. The midday meal at a medieval inn is less a simple repast and more a soft test of quiet coordination, gentle patience, and one's comfort with a level of background sound that rests somewhere between a soft celebration and a distant, gentle hum. It begins with a quiet simplicity. The hearth offers its warmth, the stew gently bubbles, and Marjorie softly rings the worn iron triangle that signals the readiness of food. A fleeting moment of quiet, immediately followed by a gentle surge of movement. Guests emerge from corners one hardly noticed. A trader gently steps over a sleeping dog. A bard quietly swings his lute over one shoulder as if preparing for a soft, melodic encounter. Two farmers softly discuss who settled first, despite there being several empty benches and no one truly keeping track. The innkeeper gently ladles out warm bowls of pottage, a dish whose exact components are known only to the pot and perhaps to higher powers. It is comforting, warm, and subtly mild unless one counts turnip as a notable essence. One guest softly inquires if it is suitable for those who prefer only plants. Another asks what such a preference means. The innkeeper gently pretends not to hear either question. Bread is offered with the quiet thud of something recently used to steady a door. Diners attempt to soften it by gently dipping it into their stew, leading to a few gentle losses at the bottom of bowls. One man softly offers his crust for an additional portion of ale. It gently succeeds. Marjorie softly moves through the gentle activity, her tray laden with mugs, her gaze holding that distant, quiet focus known only to those who have calmly navigated gentle arguments about seating before noon. She gently provides food, offers soft smiles, and issues gentle reminders, all in a fluid motion. A singular, quiet performance deserving of a soft appreciation, though a full jar near the hearth will suffice. A pair of guards are softly attempting to out-gently burp each other while a subtly cheerful monk hums a soft melody between gentle mouthfuls. The goat has quietly returned. It seems to find gentle comfort in the company. The midday meal continues for about an hour, measured by the gentle passage of the sun. Time within the inn is gently marked by how long it takes for someone to softly spill ale, subtly accuse another of quiet trickery at dice, or attempt a soft tune with a mouth full of onion. And when it concludes, a quiet settles, brief and gentle, until someone softly drops a spoon, and the rhythm gently begins anew. The noon meal has concluded. The stew has been gently consumed, the bread softly gnawed. The goat has once more been quietly guided outside with gentle words and a soft broom. Now begins the part of the day that innkeepers quietly anticipate. The clearing after guests who assured them they were quite orderly. To a casual eye, it might appear as a typical dining area in gentle disarray, but to Marjorie and the innkeeper, it is a quiet archaeological site, complete with subtle stains, misplaced personal items, and a gently perplexing quantity of onion peels in unexpected places. The wooden tables are softly wiped with a cloth that, much like the innkeeper, has seen many things. It does not so much clean as it softly spreads everything into a gentle medieval sheen. The floors are swept, mostly by gently nudging items beneath benches and quietly hoping gravity assists. A boot is softly discovered beneath one of the stools. No one claims it. It is added to the growing, quiet collection behind the bar, noted as possibly belonging to someone. Marjorie begins gathering dishes with the calm speed and precision of one who has performed this task daily for a decade and would quietly appreciate a pause. Guests who linger too long receive the gentle look. A gaze so potent it once prompted a noble to softly apologize and offer an entire silver coin. He was not seen again, but the tale remains a gentle legend. The stew pot is gently cleared. Whatever remains is either offered to the pigs or quietly folded into the next day's preparation. To avoid waste is to prevent need, especially when no one can discern the difference after the third gentle serving. The innkeeper softly murmurs something about cleansing the mugs, but everyone quietly understands he will simply rinse them in the rain barrel and consider it a gentle purification. There is a vessel for soaking, but its purpose is largely symbolic now. As the last few crumbs are gently swept away and the benches are softly returned to their places, somehow always more gently inclined than before, the room slowly begins to resemble an inn once more, rather than the aftermath of a particularly well-fed, quiet gathering. Marjorie takes a quiet breath, gently smooths her apron, and prepares for the next gentle wave, because in a medieval inn, peace is never quite settled. It is merely the soft pause between one gentle disarray and the next. And somewhere, someone is already softly wondering when the evening meal will be ready. Just as the last dish is stacked, the final spoon softly dried, and Marjorie dares to take a quiet sip of leftover ale in peace. It happens. The door gently creaks open. New guests, calm faces, fresh, gentle challenges, and most notably, questions. The first traveler steps in, cloaked in an oversized garment, with a beard that could comfortably shelter several small forest creatures, and an expression suggesting he is about to quietly assess the establishment on parchment. He approaches the counter and softly asks, "Do you offer almond milk?" The silence that follows is immediate and complete. Somewhere in the corner, a stool softly groans under the quiet weight of shared contemplation. Behind him, a young couple arrives, clearly not bound by marriage given their close proximity and their gentle determination not to touch, and they inquire if they might quietly view the room first. Marjorie simply points gently upstairs. It is made of wood. It has walls. It generally does not allow summer rain to enter. A third guest, covered in fine dust and subtle self-importance, quietly insists on knowing the origin of the inn's candles, whether the stew is prepared with gentle consideration, and if the goat has been encouraged to remain outside. The goat, of course, chooses that precise moment to enter and gently sneezes on his boots. Then there is the bard, a different one this time, who quietly proposes to offer a song as payment. He gently strums his lute, producing 3 misplaced notes, and begins a soft melody about the lady in the gently leaking chamber pot. He is immediately, and politely, asked to pause, with the gentle assistance of a broom. The innkeeper nods gently through every request, every mild observation, and every softly misspoken inquiry about variations of wine. There is one wine, and it holds a gentle reddish hue. He does not dispute, he does not correct. He simply listens quietly, offers a soft smile, and allows Marjorie to manage. Because if there is one thing that fills an inn more quickly than rain, it is travelers with gentle opinions, and they seldom arrive in quiet stillness. As the day gently fades into sundown, the common room becomes a soft tapestry of personalities. The quiet scribe in the corner, the softly conversing merchants near the fire, the bard on his second gentle attempt to charm through volume, and the goat, now quietly slumbering beneath table 3. The innkeeper softly exhales. Another gentle wave of guests, another series of minor, unfolding moments, and each of them, somehow, believes they are the most ordinary. Supper arrives not with grand flair, but with a gentle murmur, a soft, overlapping hum. Chairs softly scrape, mugs gently clink. Someone offers a dramatic, quiet cough, hinting they have waited an age, though they arrived but 9 minutes ago and still wear their traveling cloak as if it were a ceremonial garment. Marjorie emerges from the kitchen, holding a pot that is still gently warm and undeniably still stew. The day's offering has not shifted. It remains the inn's classic dish, Whatever remained from earlier gently warmed anew. It is served with a portion of bread that could quietly serve as a soft, blunt object, and a side of gentle observations from the guests. This stew holds a different essence than last night's. One traveler softly notes with a hint of quiet suspicion. It is the same stew, Marjorie replies without lifting her gaze. Oh, well, it's quite agreeable, they add quickly, now gently concerned for their utensil privileges. The bard, still present somehow, softly offers to perform a melody in honor of the meal. He manages one verse before Marjorie gently places a ladle in his bowl with a touch more enthusiasm than strictly necessary. He receives the quiet message. Near the hearth, two merchants engage in a lively, but contained, discussion about grain prices, which somehow remains softer than the couple quietly discussing the number of small inhabitants they counted on their upstairs bed. The goat has gently returned. It is now settled under the table again, being quietly fed by a child who insists it is his cherished, comforting companion. The stew is comforting, the ale flows gently, which aids the comforting nature of the stew, and despite the occasional soft comment about texture, warmth, or the quiet mystery of the meat, everyone quietly partakes. The innkeeper stands behind the counter, gently polishing a mug that has not truly known cleanliness since the last harvest, observing his patrons with the quiet resignation of one who has accepted his gentle path. He knows that in about an hour, someone will softly spill something, someone else will gently drift into slumber mid-sentence, and the bard will try again. He always softly tries again. But for now, the room is a soft hum of activity, a gentle disarray, and very much alive, which is, if nothing else, a quiet sign of success, because in a medieval inn, supper does not need to be exquisite. It merely needs to arrive without incident. As the final spoon gently meets the bottom of a bowl and guests begin to lean back with the satisfied, quiet sounds of those who have peacefully completed another round of stew, the gentle evening activities commence in a broadly defined way. There is no set schedule, no announcements, no host with a lute and a printed program. The evening simply unfolds, much like all gentle performances, with no rigid structure, modest talent, and a subtle possibility of minor scrapes. The bard naturally senses the quiet moment. He gently clears his throat, softly plucks 3 uncertain strings, and quietly announces a ballad titled, "The Fair Lady of Festerwell Who Married a Troll." Half the room offers a gentle murmur of approval, the other half a soft sigh. The goat softly sneezes. His voice is eager, the words occasionally rhyming. The innkeeper pours himself a mug of ale and sips deeply, in the manner of a man who quietly understands there are still several verses remaining, and at least one will gently involve the disappearance of a sock. Meanwhile, at the far table, 2 old friends are gently attempting to outdo each other in a softly slurred riddle game. The rules are unclear. One of the riddles might, in fact, be a cooking instruction. A nearby monk politely covers his ears and begins to softly hum psalms at a volume typically reserved for distant church bells. The dice appear next, wooden, gently worn, and possibly blessed or otherwise. Opinions softly differ. A small gathering forms as quiet wagers are made using coins, buttons, a very old pair, and one man's left shoe. No one questions this. The pair's value is softly debated. Marjorie circles the room like a quiet falcon with exceptional hearing. She watches for gentle disturbances, a spilled ale, and anyone who appears poised to stand on a table. She gently intercepts the bard mid-motion just as he attempts a dramatic flourish on a bench leg not quite suited for such displays. In the corner, a shy traveler timidly produces a flute. It offers 3 lovely notes before the goat gently nudges him. A soft murmur of appreciation ripples through the room. Evening quiet entertainment at the inn is not polished, rehearsed, or even entirely permissible in some towns. But it is authentic, it is present, and it almost always concludes with someone softly drifting to sleep in their mug or gently waking with a new, soot-drawn marking. There is no official closing time at the inn. No bell chimes, no lights out announcement, and certainly no polite usher gently guiding guests towards the exit. No, closing time is more of a gentle, gradual fading. It begins when the bard finally loses his quiet audience. This usually occurs when he forgets the words to the final verse and replaces them with gentle throat clearings. Someone softly offers a piece of bread in appreciation. It is unclear if it is applause or a quiet request for him to cease. Next, a few patrons begin to softly slump, not necessarily from the ale, but from the sheer comforting weight of the stew. The meal has settled. Gravity has quietly claimed its victory. One merchant leans so far back on his stool that he becomes a part of the furniture. His companion uses him as a gentle footrest. Marjorie begins stacking empty mugs as if constructing a small, quiet fortress. She speaks little, simply raising one eyebrow, which in the language of innkeeping gently implies, conclude your activities or prepare to assist with the sweeping. There is always one guest who gently insists on ordering something after the hearth has quieted. Tonight, it is a peddler who believes a light snack involves a full roasted duck. He is offered bread, a quiet glance, and a gentle suggestion to chew slowly and seek slumber sooner. The goat, ever present, has curled up by the embers. It is technically not permitted indoors, but at this quiet hour, it has shown more attentive interest during story time than half the humans, so gentle exceptions are made. The innkeeper begins his rounds. He gently pokes at the dying fire, checks that no one has quietly settled face down in the stew pot again, and softly nudges a gently snoring traveler from a table onto a bench, a practiced movement learned through years of subtle adjustments. One couple heads quietly upstairs, gently brushing against every surface. They will, by morning, softly comment on the disturbances. The irony is noted and quietly stored for future, gentle amusement. Eventually, the room empties, not all at once, but in soft, swaying movements, like a gentle tide of cloaks, quiet yawns, and the occasional soft hiccup. The chatter softly fades. The laughter gently diminishes. The inn settles into a quiet, almost. A mug softly rolls off a table. Someone upstairs gently drops a boot. The goat offers a deep, quiet sigh. But for now, the most demanding part of the day has gently passed. The guests are settled in sleep, or at least resting horizontally and no longer speaking. Ascending the stairs in a medieval inn is an act of gentle trust, not spiritual conviction, but structural. The steps softly creak, gently groan, and occasionally shift beneath one's weight as if considering a quiet retirement. But for the weary traveler, upstairs means one thing: a place to gently settle. The rooms vary. Some offer quiet privacy, if one is wealthy or convincingly, gently vocal about it. Most, however, are shared dormitory-style arrangements where strangers rest mere inches apart, and everyone gently pretends not to notice anything. The beds are wooden frames filled with straw and quiet dreams. Blankets are present if one is fortunate. Pillows only if one brought their own or cleverly folded their cloak. And yes, the straw rustles constantly, sometimes because it is dry, sometimes because something within it is also attempting to find slumber. Soft snoring is inevitable. Someone always begins within moments of lying down. Not light, endearing snoring. We are speaking of medieval snoring, the kind that gently echoes off wooden beams and prompts one to quietly wonder if a wild boar has settled in the rafters. One guest gently shifts in sleep, another softly speaks. One hums a quiet melody through his nose, which is subtly unsettling. The concept of personal space does not quite exist. One can draw their cloak over their head, but that only gently muffles the sounds of someone in the next bed quietly discussing dreams involving fish and taxes. Someone else continually rises to check on the stew, which is merely a gentle euphemism for kneading the chamber pot, discreetly placed behind a curtain that deceives no one. Speaking of which, yes, the chamber pot. It is there. It is full. It is a shared, quiet consideration. It also serves as someone's footrest until they gently realize their oversight, a moment too late. Occasionally, someone gently stumbles in after dark, uncertain of their assigned resting place and prepared to softly debate it. Arguments are brief, muffled by quiet exhaustion, and typically settled by whoever possesses the larger footwear or a stronger, natural aroma. And yet, despite the gentle sounds, the subtle scents, the curious straw, and the shared atmosphere, there is something oddly comforting about it. A dozen individuals, each from different places, sleeping beneath the same gently leaning beams, softly breathing in unison. Upstairs is not entirely tranquil, but it is safe, moderately warm, and with luck, mostly free of goats, which at this quiet hour of night counts as a gentle luxury. It is late. The fire has gently diminished to soft, glowing embers. The common room is finally still, save for the occasional soft creak, the kind that prompts one to gently wonder if the building is settling or if something living is quietly moving within the beams. Regardless, it is time for the innkeeper's quiet, midnight round. This ritual is not written anywhere, but every innkeeper knows it. It involves a candlestick, a tired, quiet sigh, and a silent wish that no one has passed away, started a fire, or gently sleepwalked into the pantry again. The tour begins downstairs. The benches are mostly empty, the mugs are half full, half spilled, and possibly gently becoming something new. A spoon floats in the ale barrel. The innkeeper prefers not to know how or why. He gently checks the doors, front and back, both likely secured, perhaps. The front one tends to gently swing open during strong winds or quiet, heartfelt discussions. He places a bucket gently in front of it, just in case. Behind the counter, he softly counts the coins from the day's trade. Most of it is legitimate currency, some are buttons, carved bones, and once again that same familiar pair. He places it in the value undetermined bowl. Next, upstairs. He tiptoes like a man carefully moving through a den of gently drowsy creatures. Each floorboard softly announces his presence, louder than the last. Behind one door, someone snores with gentle conviction. Behind another, someone softly murmurs about taxes in their sleep. He quietly peers into the shared room, a gentle sea of limbs and cloaks. One guest is resting upside down. Another has quietly tucked themselves beneath the bed like a human storage container. The chamber pot is full, as always. Then comes the subtly unusual part of the patrol. Things that should not be in motion. A broom has gently fallen over again. The candle softly flickers despite no discernible breeze. He hears the unmistakable, soft sound of a lute string being plucked, even though the bard retired 2 hours ago, or was gently secured to the wagon outside, depending on who you ask. And of course, the goat is subtly missing once more. The innkeeper softly exhales. Everything is, by this inn's gentle standards, quite adequate. He descends the stairs, gently extinguishes the candle, and softly murmurs, "If anything should catch fire, may it be the less agreeable stew." It is the heart of the night, and technically everyone is in slumber, but let us not imagine it as truly restful. The shared upstairs room hums softly like a gentle beehive of human comfort. Snoring is the prevailing sound, layered, subtly varied, and deeply unmusical. One guest snores in soft bursts like a gentle, hiccuping creature. Another aims for volume, gently vibrating the wooden beams with each breath. It is like a soft symphony of quiet breathing. Someone softly speaks in their sleep, mostly about carrots. Another continuously whispers, "No, my lord," in a tone that suggests either a less pleasant dream or a gentle misunderstanding. A boot softly falls with a gentle thud onto the floor. No one stirs, not even the goat, now quietly nestled beneath someone's cloak as if it belongs there. The bed frames softly creak in gentle protest every time someone shifts, which happens often, as straw mattresses are not renowned for their comforting support. In fact, if one is not gently poked by a twig in the first few moments, the bed is likely to be quietly haunted. Then there is the warmth. With so many gentle bodies in one room, the temperature gently rises to a comfortable barn in summer. Cloaks are softly removed, blankets gently nudged, and someone decides to softly open the shuttered window, immediately inviting a gentle breeze and the local owl, who now peacefully declines to leave. The aroma, it is what one might politely describe as robust. A subtle blend of stew digestion, unwashed socks, warm goat, and the faint, gentle memory of ale. It would be overwhelming if everyone were not already too comfortably tired to notice. Occasionally, someone gently awakens, convinced it is morning. It is not. It is simply darker than before, and now an owl is softly observing. They gently stumble from bed, softly step on someone's hand, and are quietly urged back into place with a gentle murmur. Marjorie rests in the back room, her ears finely tuned to detect anything gently unsettling. Raised voices, sudden light thuds, or lute music after hours. So far, mostly well. And downstairs, the innkeeper peacefully slumbers behind the bar in a chair shaped precisely like his spine. He holds a mug he did not finish. He dreams of quiet stillness. He will not find it, because in a medieval inn, slumber comes in brief shifts, shared spaces, and a subtle warmth. But still, everyone is horizontal. That is considered a gentle success. At the first soft hint of light, that faint, murky gray that could be dawn or simply an optimistic moon, the inn begins to softly stir. Not with grace, but more like a barn filled with animals who have gently realized someone forgot to secure the door. Feet meet the floor with varying degrees of gentle purpose. Someone offers a dramatic, soft groan, as if waking was unexpected and entirely unjust. Another guest immediately begins searching for their missing boot. It rests on the hearth. No one knows how, but the goat does, though he chooses not to share. The shared room empties in gentle waves. The early risers, merchants, monks, and anyone with a quiet conscience, softly make their way out first. They leave behind a gentle disarray of wrinkled blankets, subtle footprints, and one still sleeping traveler who quietly insists, even in dreams, that he did not touch the cheese. Downstairs, the innkeeper is already awake. Technically, his eyes are open, his body is upright, but his spirit remains halfway between this world and wherever old barkeepers gently drift in their dreams. A place with clean mugs and quiet guests. Marjorie arrives moments later, wrapped in a shawl and quiet resolve. She begins her silent assessment of overnight changes. 2 gently overturned stools, 1 missing candle, and someone inexplicably applied jam to the broom handle. Questions begin immediately. Has anyone seen my satchel? Did I offer payment last night? Is this my goat? To each inquiry, Marjorie offers the same quiet response. A slow blink followed by a gentle, flat, perhaps. Then come the soft denials. I did not spill that ale. I was not the one gently snoring. I never made that comment about the monk's sandals. Everyone quietly denies everything, even when faced with clear evidence, like a ladle gently tucked into someone's belt or a half-eaten turnip in their boot. The bard reappears, looking a little sleepy, and announces he has composed a new verse about the night's events. He is promptly offered a bowl of porridge and gently told to consume it quietly for once. He complies. Breakfast is softly served. Stew is gently warmed. Ale is poured. Life quietly continues. By the time the sun fully rises, most guests have either quietly paid or gently bartered their way out. Some depart shyly. Others move off with quiet pride, convinced they were quite charming. But one truth remains. No one ever quietly acknowledges what happened after supper. The guests have gently departed. The goat has been quietly escorted once more, and Marjorie is softly scraping something unidentifiable from a bench with the calm focus of a surgeon and the quiet expression of a woman gently reevaluating every decision that led her here. The common room is quiet now, not entirely peaceful, but simply taking a breath. A few embers softly crackle in the hearth. The floor feels gently sticky. One bench tilts subtly to the left, either from frequent use or a quiet protest. The innkeeper stands behind the counter, gently cradling a mug of the morning's first ale as if it were a cherished family treasure. He gazes across the room and softly murmurs the same words he utters every morning. Well, that wasn't too challenging. It was, of course, but a touch of optimism aids digestion. Marjorie walks past with a tray of used spoons, a worn cloth, and the quiet look of someone who will not be answering questions before tomorrow's first light. She refills the stew pot with water, salt, and a quiet sense of hope, and begins to stir. Breakfast will arrive as it always does. Outside, a cart gently rumbles by. A rooster announces its presence somewhere in the village. A smith softly hammers something quite loud for this hour. And just like that, the world is gently awake again. And with the world come new guests. The inn's door softly opens. A farmer steps in, gently pulling a sack of something, possibly vegetable, behind him. A woman with a traveling cloak and the polite, quiet smile of someone about to gently comment on prices. And naturally, a knight with a subtly dented helmet and no quiet indoor voice. They look around. Gentle nods are exchanged. Coins quietly pass hands. Questions are softly posed. Answers are vague. The cycle gently begins anew. The innkeeper takes a quiet sip. Marjorie reties her apron. A chair is gently righted. A mug is filled. A stranger quietly sits down and immediately inquires if there is a plant-based option. The inn does not change much. The stew remains a gentle mystery. The guests remain subtly unpredictable. The goat, one suspects, possesses a spare key. And yet, despite the gentle hum of activity, the subtle disarray, and the gently curious aromas, they always return. Perhaps it is the warmth, the company, the gentle chaos, or perhaps, just perhaps, it is the only place in town where one's gentle oversights are swept away with the crumbs, and no one asks difficult questions before the morning meal. In the early 1600s, the Dutch Republic was roughly the size of a comfortable pancake and similarly flat. But let not geography mislead you. This modest area of reclaimed marshland was about to exert influence far beyond its gentle borders. While the rest of Europe was engaged in subtle disputes over faith and whose monarch possessed the more gleaming footwear, the Dutch quietly constructed an empire of soft light, steady commerce, and rich oil paint. It began with a gentle shift. Spain had held quiet sway over the Netherlands for many decades, softly displaying the Catholic banner and extracting gentle taxes from every fish and tulip bulb. But by 1648, after nearly 80 years of quiet resistance, the Dutch finally declared, "We have concluded," and with that gentle declaration, they found their freedom. What followed was less a grand national strategy and more a quiet blossoming of individual enterprise. Imagine a peaceful, early version of a bustling hub of innovation, but everyone wore comfortable wooden shoes and invested in herring. Amsterdam quietly became the financial heart of Europe. Its ports were gently crowded with vessels bound for distant lands, Asia, Africa, the Americas, anywhere with goods to exchange or resources to gather. The Dutch East India Company, essentially the rapid delivery service of the 17th century, quietly amassed fortunes from nutmeg, delicate porcelain, and, let us gently acknowledge, the establishment of colonies. But the subtle wonder, while their ships were transporting spices across vast oceans, back home, people were quietly reading newspapers, sipping warm beverages, and observing their neighbors being gently captured in oil by artists named Rembrandt and Vermeer. These painters did not merely create likenesses. They quietly crafted enduring images. Vermeer softly illuminated quiet, intimate scenes, lit as if by a divine glow. Rembrandt gave older figures and biblical narratives a quiet depth that surpassed many a dramatic portrayal. Art was no longer solely for royalty. Merchants also desired their likenesses. Even butchers could acquire a pleasant still life featuring a gentle pig's head and a lemon quite refined. And then there were the tulips. Oh yes, the famed tulip mania. A brief yet remarkable period where individuals quietly exchanged entire homes simply to possess a single flower bulb. Just one bulb. The market then gently diminished, much like a tired sailor. But by then, the Dutch had quietly established their reputation. Remarkably successful, subtly distinct, and never uninteresting. So how did a small, modest republic become the quiet admiration of Europe? By mastering the gentle currents of the sea, the subtle movements of the financial market, and the art of self-depiction. And this was only the quiet beginning. If the Dutch Golden Age possessed a quiet pulse, it was not within a grand palace or a parliament building. It was in the gentle rhythm of the docks. Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Hoorn, Delft. These were not merely cities. They were quiet launching points for global influence, guided by careful accounts and gentle negotiations. While France was occupied with its elegant attire and Spain continued to tally its gold, the Dutch were quietly shaping modern commerce, one ledger entry at a time. Their quiet strength, the merchant fleet. At its peak, the Dutch possessed more ships than any other nation on earth. More than England, more than Spain, perhaps even more than gentle reason might suggest. But these were not merely fishing boats with a strong demeanor. These were armed merchant vessels, gracefully designed and practical, laden with both gentle armaments and ample cargo space. They transported everything: silk from distant China, spices from Indonesia, sugar from Brazil, and occasionally a gentle impact from a cannonball if less agreeable company appeared. The Dutch East India Company, also known by its quiet acronym VOC, was the world's first large-scale trading enterprise. Shareholders, financial markets, returns on investment, yes, it was the gentle precursor to modern commerce, before it became widely accepted or even fully understood in its ethical implications. The VOC undertook whatever was necessary to safeguard its gains. Strongholds, private forces, and, let us gently acknowledge, some rather firm colonial approaches. The spice trade was not merely competitive. It involved significant, quiet determinations. And while the VOC held sway in the East, the West India Company managed affairs in the Atlantic. Think sugar, rum, and the quiet, pervasive issue of human trafficking. The Dutch involvement in the transatlantic slave trade was not merely a minor aspect. It was deeply ingrained, methodically planned, and yielded considerable profits. The very same country commissioning gentle paintings of milkmaids was also recording human lives as commodities. The Golden Age carried a deeply complex and subtle undertone. Yet, amidst this quiet efficiency, the Dutch also brought a sense of order to global exchange. Their ships followed established routes. Their goods were meticulously listed. Their ports were clean, secure, and remarkably well protected. If there was ever a nation that could transport tulips, cheese, and gunpowder on the same vessel without confusing the labels, it was the Dutch. They were not merely navigating oceans. They were gently guiding economic principles. While other nations dispatched explorers, the Dutch sent careful accountants, accompanied by gentle safeguards. Their influence was not merely built with military strength. It was constructed with balanced ledgers. And somehow, amidst the maritime quiet, their small republic continued to gently flourish. Next, we softly enter the gentle, illuminated world of Vermeer, where everyday moments quietly became timeless. While Dutch vessels transported goods across continents and trading companies transformed quarterly gains into shining adornments, something else was softly unfolding, almost silently, within the towns and homes of the Dutch Republic. A young woman gently poured milk, another softly adjusted her pearls. A letter was quietly read beside an open window, and with each quiet, ordinary moment, a man named Johannes Vermeer transformed everyday life into enduring beauty. Vermeer was not the most celebrated painter of his time. In fact, he was not even the most prolific. He produced a modest total of about 35 known works, that is less than what Rembrandt might have inadvertently left on the floor during a single less productive week. But what Vermeer lacked in quantity, he compensated for with a quiet brilliance. His paintings are calm, thoughtfully arranged, and possess an almost ethereal glow, as if sunlight itself is gently paused. What set him apart? Meticulousness, intricate detail, and an almost mystical understanding of how light gently falls. The interiors he depicted were not simply backdrops. They were like silent characters. One could almost imagine the soft creak of the wooden floors and the gentle ticking of a clock. And that is the quiet essence of the Dutch Golden Age. While the outside world moved with increasing pace, artists like Vermeer quietly captured the sacred nature of stillness. Of course, Vermeer's subtle artistry did not occur in isolation. This was a society that greatly appreciated visual representations. The average Dutch home in the 17th century held more paintings on its walls than utensils in its kitchen drawer. Serene landscapes, gentle portraits, quiet still lives, ships, cows, and a generous array of quietly arranged fish. They embraced it all. Why? Because this was a society of modest means. Merchants, bakers, and brewers possessed both resources and a discerning taste. They did not desire winged figures in clouds. They sought something that resembled their own world, but with a more gentle illumination. And the painters delivered. Dutch art became a quiet industry, swiftly produced, carefully detailed, and refreshingly rooted in local scenes. But returning to Vermeer, His works were not flamboyant or overtly political. They did not assert themselves loudly, they whispered. And in those whispers lay volumes about intimacy, quiet solitude, and the gentle drama of domestic life. He painted what was often gently overlooked and rendered it unforgettable. In the next passage, we will gently step out of these softly lit rooms and onto the streets of a growing republic, because just beyond Vermeer's windows, an economic experiment was quietly unfolding that would both dazzle and subtly diminish. The famed tulip mania. Imagine this: you gently step into a public house in 1636. You were simply a regular Dutch citizen, perhaps a baker or a cheese merchant. A person beside you offers to sell you a tulip bulb. Not a collection of flowers, just one bulb. The cost? Equivalent to your entire home. And the curious part? You gently consider it. Welcome to Tulip Mania, a quiet dream of early commerce and quite possibly the world's first recorded financial surge. The Dutch did not, of course, create flowers, but they perfected the gentle art of monetizing them. Tulips, especially the rare striped variations caused by a virus that subtly enhanced their appeal, became quiet symbols of status. Owning a unique tulip bulb was akin to possessing a luxury carriage today, except one had to gently extract it from the soil and hope no one inadvertently incorporated it into a meal. At first, it was primarily wealthy collectors engaging in gentle transactions, but soon everyone wished to participate. Farmers, barbers, chimney sweeps. If you could hold a coin and possessed a gentle pulse, you were quietly engaged in tulip speculation. Entire savings were committed. Future agreements were quietly forged. People exchanged rights to bulbs that had not yet gently bloomed. It was no longer simply about flowers. It was about gently transferring a promise before the first petal appeared. For a brief, gentle period, tulips were like the digital currency of the 17th century. Then came the gentle decline. One soft February day in 1637, people quietly ceased their purchases. Perhaps they gently realized they were committing their homes for plants. Perhaps someone actually observed a tulip and thought, "Is that truly all?" Prices gently fell, fortunes quietly diminished, and suddenly that single bulb for which you paid the price of a canal home became without worth. One might as well plant it and try to quietly enjoy the view. Curiously, the Dutch economy did not fully unravel with the tulip market's gentle fall. It was a source of quiet embarrassment, yes. There were legal disputes, there were public pronouncements about avarice and vanity. But the Republic gently acknowledged, brushed off its garments, and moved onward. It was not their final encounter with speculative enthusiasm, merely the most aesthetically pleasing. Tulip mania became a gentle narrative about pride, unpredictable markets, and the human inclination to pursue beauty until it gently surprises. But while the bulbs gently faded, the Dutch spirit did not, because just around the corner, the Republic was quietly building a cultural presence through books, maps, and fresh ideas. And that is our next quiet journey. While tulips were exchanged like precious metals and Vermeer was quietly depicting women engaged in very subtle activities near windows, something else was softly unfolding in the Dutch Republic, the quiet expansion of thought. The Dutch did not merely transport goods. They transported ideas, and in the 17th century, that was a subtly challenging endeavor. Let us begin with printing presses. At a time when expressing a less agreeable opinion in, for instance, Spain could lead to being physically harmed, the Netherlands became a quiet refuge for writers, thinkers, and those with a gentle, questioning spirit. The Dutch maintained a relatively open approach to independent thought, at least as long as it did not interfere with commerce, which meant books flowed quietly from Amsterdam like wine at a merchant's quiet gathering. Ideas restricted elsewhere found safe harbor here. Descartes composed and published his works in the Netherlands. Baruch Spinoza, the quietly profound philosopher who suggested that perhaps the divine was not merely an elder figure in the sky but something closer to reality itself, lived and pondered here in relative peace, until his thoughts became perhaps too gentle even for the gently questioning. Universities like Leiden and Utrecht quietly became centers of intellectual pursuit. Students from across Europe arrived to study everything from legal principles and healing arts to the latest understandings in optics and bodily structure. And because this was the Dutch, They studied in buildings clean enough to gently dine upon and meticulously organized their knowledge with quiet precision. Cartography also flourished. Dutch mapmakers like Joan Blau were not simply sketching shorelines. They were gently reshaping the European understanding of the world. Their atlases were masterpieces, decorative, somewhat imprecise in areas, but remarkably detailed for their era. Do you wish to quietly explore the coast of Java or dream of Brazil? Simply open a Dutch map. This intellectual curiosity was not limited to scholars. The middle class read quietly and extensively. Pamphlets, travel narratives, scientific observations, and subtly intriguing poetry. Newspapers circulated stories from distant Constantinople to the New World. For the first time in European history, the ability to read was not a luxury. It was a quiet way of life. But it was not all enlightenment and quiet contemplation. These ideas gently stirred the atmosphere. Religious tensions quietly simmered. Philosophers were gently cautioned. Some books were softly withdrawn. The Dutch tolerated much, but even tolerance has its subtle boundaries when new ideas begin to gently question established norms. Still, for a republic of just a few million inhabitants, the Dutch exerted significant influence in shaping modern thought. And speaking of shaping, next we turn to the architectural flourishing that transformed their cities into elegant structures of brick canals and proud, gentle facades. Imagine a city built like a gentle painting. Straight lines, soft curves, and everything in its proper, quiet place, even the ducks. That was Amsterdam in the 17th century. A masterpiece of urban planning brought to life by skilled builders, astute merchants, and a quiet refusal to let water claim victory. The Dutch did not merely construct cities. They gently coaxed them into existence from the water. Much of the land the Republic occupied was technically beneath the water or had recently been gently encouraged not to be with carefully placed barriers, pumps, and sheer determination. The Dutch reshaped their surroundings. Where other nations saw marshland, they saw potential for gentle development. At the heart of this watery marvel was the graceful canal ring of Amsterdam, known as the Grachtengordel. It was elegant, efficient, and as close as urban planning comes to quiet poetry. Concentric canals gently divided the city into distinct areas. Goods moved by boat, not cart. Wealthy merchants constructed narrow homes with gentle steps and grand windows, subtly displaying just enough prosperity to impress without appearing ostentatious. Those tall houses with the ornate gables? They were not merely aesthetic choices, they were careful financial strategies. Property taxes were based on width, not height, so people built upward, not outward, gently concentrating luxury into vertical elegance. The result? An architectural horizon that resembles gently crafted gingerbread and carries the faint, quiet scent of thoughtful moderation. Brick was the preferred material. It was readily available, durable, and gave the streets the appearance of a calm, Renaissance-era construction. But design was not solely about visual appeal. The Dutch emphasized practicality. Even their ornate fronts included gentle winches and pulleys to lift furnishings through windows, as internal spiral staircases were less stately and more akin to a gentle, confined experience. Public buildings also quietly flourished. Town halls, weighing houses, guild halls. The most magnificent of them all, Amsterdam's Town Hall, completed in 1655. It was so grand that Louis XIV reportedly referred to it as the eighth wonder of the world and promptly emulated it, as was his custom. And amidst all this architectural splendor, there was a quiet message. The Dutch Republic was not about monarchs or grand cathedrals. It was about cities, citizens, and quiet civic pride. Clean streets, tidy facades, order, and elegance. This was a built environment that subtly reflected a national mindset. Precise, practical, and quietly confident. But beneath this order, gentle tensions simmered. Political divisions, religious differences, and international rivals were gathering. In the next chapter, we gently delve into the conflicts, both internal and external, that would test the very fabric of this golden republic. For all its quiet brilliance, the Dutch Golden Age was not a serene utopia of perfect harmony and polite cheese tasting. Beneath the tulips and the soft oil paintings lay a republic gently built upon subtle pressures. political, religious, and increasingly military. First, the political landscape. The Dutch Republic was not precisely a republic in the contemporary sense. It was a subtle arrangement of provinces, each gently safeguarding its rights like a child carefully protecting small treats. The true influence resided with the affluent merchant class in cities such as Amsterdam and Leiden. These individuals were not nobility, but they possessed the means to quietly assert themselves. At the pinnacle of the political structure was the stadtholder, typically from the House of Orange, a military leader with just enough influence to create a gentle unease among others. Consider him a monarch with a subtle disclaimer. Some provinces found him agreeable, others less so. The result: a continuous, gentle struggle between centralized guidance and provincial independence, a kind of cooperative project where some members wished to change the leader and others were closely related to the leader. Religiously, the Dutch had quietly moved away from Catholicism, but this did not equate to complete unity. The Calvinists were in a position of gentle authority, and they were not particularly known for their open-mindedness. Other Protestants, Jews, and Catholics were generally tolerated, as long as they remained quiet, avoided building large places of worship, or holding public celebrations. Everything was orderly. Privately, a gentle tension lingered. Internationally, the Dutch had suddenly become a significant force, and the established powers did not quite appreciate this. The English, once their Protestant allies, now viewed them as economic competitors. This led to the Anglo-Dutch Wars, a series of naval encounters where both sides experienced losses of ships, pride, and occasionally their composure. The Dutch held their own, thanks to admirals like Michiel de Ruyter, who possessed an equal measure of quiet daring, strategic insight, and national heroism. He once quietly sailed up the Thames and gently acquired the English flagship for a leisurely moment. But warfare is costly. Maintaining fleets, defending trade routes, and offering quiet incentives to neighbors not to attack. All this added gentle pressure to a delicate system. And while the Dutch could manage commerce, culture, and colonies with a quiet grace, they could not maintain this delicate balance indefinitely. The subtle imperfections in the Golden Age had begun to reveal themselves, not in the art or the architecture, but within the very framework that created it. Next, we will visit the gentle twilight of this era and quietly ponder: how does a Golden Age conclude? With a sudden end, a conflict, or simply a quiet yawn from history? Golden Ages do not typically conclude with dramatic events. More often, they gently fade, somewhat subtly, like a gathering where the most vibrant guests have already departed and someone has just gently tipped over the wine. The Dutch Republic in the late 1600s was not collapsing. It was simply sighing. The indicators were subtle at first. Commerce remained strong, but competitors were quietly catching up. The English and French were improving their naval capabilities and becoming even more adept at replicating Dutch business methods. The English established their own East India Company, incorporated some colonial aspirations, and added the one element the Dutch lacked: a monarchy with a flair for self-promotion. Meanwhile, France under Louis XIV had grown assertive, quite assertive. He was not content with his grand estate and elegant footwear. He desired more territory, greater influence, and perhaps a few Dutch cities along the way. The resulting conflicts were challenging and costly. The Dutch achieved some victories, experienced a few more setbacks, and steadily expended resources throughout. Domestically, the Republic faced another gentle challenge: a quiet lack of novelty. Innovation slowed. Painters ceased exploring radical new concepts and began to repeat what was readily accepted. Gentle rows of cows, ships, and sleepy windmills. Art became more predictable. Banking became more cautious. The canal homes retained their beauty, but the dynamic energy had shifted. One could sense the gentle dimming of the light. There were deeper, subtle divisions too. The separation between the House of Orange and the Republican regents grew. The middle class, once the driving force of prosperity, began to quietly stagnate. Gentle tensions brewed between established wealth and emerging ambition. And most importantly, younger Dutch people quietly ceased believing they were at the center of the world, because they no longer were. The final transition came not as a single dramatic event, but as a change in the prevailing atmosphere. The Age of Enlightenment was dawning elsewhere. Britain assumed the role of the world's leading financial and naval power. France took center stage in the arts and sciences until political upheaval intervened. And the Dutch, once the quiet marvel of Europe, found themselves gently eased from the prominent position. But the legacy of the Dutch Golden Age never truly vanished. It continued within libraries, in galleries, in legal frameworks, and in shipping routes. The world they helped shape did not forget them. They simply ceased to be the primary focus. Next, in our concluding thoughts, we explore the lasting influence of this remarkable era and how a small republic gently altered the course of the modern world. Although the curtain gently fell on the Dutch Golden Age, its echoes have never truly ceased. The 17th century republic might have relinquished its global prominence, but it left subtle imprints on everything from economic systems to artistic expression, and even on how we quietly consider the concept of freedom itself. Let us begin with the concept of commerce. The Dutch did not invent money, exchange, or aspiration, but they refined them with breathtaking efficiency. They established the world's first stock exchange, pioneered the concept of shared ownership in enterprises, and developed financial tools that are still in use today. If you have ever gently considered your investments or quietly observed a financial graph, you have Dutch merchants to quietly acknowledge. They also quietly reshaped global trade, not merely through their vessels, but through their systematic approaches. Risk management, meticulous record-keeping, and organized accounting, all refined to a high degree of precision in Amsterdam. And while they were certainly not without their complexities, such as colonialism, they possessed a profound logistical ingenuity. They made trade scalable, predictable, and global. In the realm of the arts, their influence remains timeless. Vermeer's serene light, Rembrandt's expressive faces, the intimate realism of domestic scenes, these became the visual language of Western art. Their paintings gently taught us that true significance did not require grand deities and instruments of conflict. Sometimes it was a woman gently pouring milk, captured in a moment of quiet stillness. In the world of ideas, they quietly carved out a space for thoughtful consideration. The Dutch approach to tolerance, imperfect yet notable, allowed thinkers like Spinoza and Descartes to publish works that would have been suppressed elsewhere. In doing so, they gently propelled Europe toward the Enlightenment. The freedom of thought, varied religious perspectives, and scientific inquiry all found quiet roots in Dutch soil. Even their cities established a standard. Amsterdam's canals, Utrecht's centers of learning, the brick gables and clean, easily navigable streets all served as quiet blueprints for modern urban life. Order without excessive display, function elegantly presented. They did not build for rulers, they built for citizens. And perhaps that is the gentle core of it all. The Dutch Golden Age was not about vast empires or grand cathedrals or inherent royal authority. It was about what a small, determined, and subtly damp republic could achieve with intellect, perseverance, and a quietly meticulous approach to record-keeping. It did not endure indefinitely. Golden ages never truly do. But in the brief, radiant period of that century, the Dutch presented the world with a new model of quiet success, one driven not by royalty, but by ordinary people performing extraordinary acts. Thanks to them, the modern world gently follows in their wake, quietly exploring new horizons on maps they helped to create. Forget grand arenas, elaborate agreements, and stirring national anthems. The very first Olympic Games possessed none of that. No officials in striped attire, no precise timing devices, no slow-motion replays. Just the soft presence of dust, gentle effort, and a sacred olive tree. The year was 776 BCE, and the setting was Olympia, a quiet, sacred sanctuary in the Peloponnese dedicated to none other than Zeus himself, the ruler of the deities, master of gentle lightning, and an apparent enthusiast for athletic leg strength. But these were not merely local contests to fill the time between harvests. They were sacred, deeply spiritual even. The ancient Greeks did not separate quiet worship from physical excellence. In their view, competing unclothed beneath the warmth of the Greek sun was not merely a display. It was a profound act of devotion. To test the limits of one's body before Zeus was the ultimate offering, one far more agreeable than sacrificing animals or composing hymns in traditional poetic forms. The origins of the games are a subtly complex blend of myth. Some suggest Hercules established them after quietly clearing the Augean stables, which, frankly, sounds like an event one would wish to transform into something else. Others believe King Pelops, yes, the same figure with the subtly fated descendants, began them after a victory in a chariot race. But whatever the narrative, by 776 BCE, the games were formally recognized, recorded, and already held in quiet esteem. The first documented event, the Stadion, a brief foot race approximately 600 feet in length, or one stade. The only known victor that year was a cook named Charybdis of Elis. That is correct. The first Olympic champion was an individual who likely prepared by moving swiftly between kitchens and slicing tender meat. He did not receive a grand prize. He received an olive wreath, enduring renown, and the right to have quiet verses composed about his strength. All participants were Greek, male, and citizens. No women were permitted to compete or even observe, unless they held a sacred religious role. Married women discovered attempting to enter risked being gently removed from a cliff, which feels a touch extreme even by ancient considerations. But despite the simplicity, the stakes were profoundly significant. To achieve victory at Olympia was not merely a personal triumph. It brought quiet glory to one's polis, one's city-state. One was no longer simply a person. One became a revered figure, and such figures in ancient Greece lived on in quiet memory. The first Olympic Games may have commenced with a single foot race, but events gently escalated. What began as one individual sprinting a modest distance evolved into a sprawling schedule of events that tested every aspect of the male form. Quickness, power, balance, and the subtle art of engaging in quiet physical contests while partially covered in olive oil. Let us begin with the simplest, running. After the Stadion, more races were gently introduced. The Dialos was essentially the ancient 400-meter dash, one length of the track there, and one return. Then came the Dolichos, a long-distance race that could extend up to 24 laps. That is over 5 kilometers in the warm Greek summer sun, unclothed, without pauses for water, no accompanying melodies, just the individual, their feet, and likely some subtly uncomfortable dust. But it was not solely about quickness. The Greeks cherished physical contests, and their games reflected this. Wrestling, or pale, was a measured and technical pursuit. No biting or eye gouging was permitted, but nearly everything else was part of the gentle engagement. One needed to gently bring their opponent to the ground 3 times to secure victory. It was the thoughtful counterpart to the far more robust pankration. A blend of striking and grappling where almost anything was allowed. Gentle impacts, soft kicks, controlled holds. It was intense, unrefined, and deeply appreciated. The rules? To endeavor not to cause mortal harm to one's opponent, at least not directly before the observing officials. Boxing, termed pygmachia, was a rigorous activity. No protective coverings, just leather straps gently wrapped around the knuckles. Contests often concluded with minor abrasions and strained bones, and surrender was the only path to conclusion. It was less about graceful movement and more about enduring with one's composure intact. Then there was the pentathlon, a 5-event demonstration for the ultimate versatile competitor. It encompassed running, wrestling, long jump, javelin throw, and discus throw. The long jump was performed with weights called halteres, ostensibly to provide gentle momentum, which sounds more like a subtle tripping hazard than an athletic advantage. And finally, chariot racing, held in the hippodrome. It was swift, demanding, and occasionally concluded with significant outcomes. The interesting detail: the owners of the horses received the honor, not the drivers. So an aristocrat could compensate a stable attendant to risk his well-being for renown and still claim the olive wreath. Quite traditional. Each event gently pushed individuals to their limits, and sometimes beyond. But they were not competing for precious metals or currency. They pursued something even more valued in ancient Greece: kleos, enduring remembrance. To the ancient Greeks, the Olympic Games were not merely a display of physical prowess. They were, first and foremost, an act of quiet reverence. The athletes were not simply competitors. They were pilgrims. And Olympia, that was not merely an arena. It was a sacred place dedicated to the king of the gods himself, Zeus. Nestled within a peaceful grove known as the Altus, Olympia felt more like a temple than a stadium. Before a single race was run or a discus gently propelled, the sacred atmosphere had to be honored. The most significant structure, the Temple of Zeus, a monumental creation that once housed a colossal ivory and gold depiction of the god, sculpted by Phidias. It was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and yes, it undeniably presided over the games like a divine observer. The rituals commenced days before the competitions. Athletes took solemn oaths before a statue of Zeus Horkios, Zeus of the Oaths, promising not to engage in deceit, bribery, or biting during wrestling. Violating that promise was not just considered poor sportsmanship. It was sacrilege. Those found to have cheated were fined, and their penalties contributed to the creation of bronze statues of Zeus that lined the entrance path, enduring reminders of their quiet transgression. And then there were the offerings, many of them. Dozens of oxen were quietly offered at the altar of Zeus. The gentle smoke, the soft chants, the ritual flow, it was all part of a grand communal offering. The meat was prepared and shared among observers and priests, transforming the games into a sacred, large-scale outdoor meal. Fire was central to the ceremony. A sacred flame, believed to have been ignited by the sun's gentle rays, burned at the altar of Hestia. This tradition subtly inspired the modern Olympic flame, though thankfully without the animal offerings. Observers, athletes, judges, they did not merely come for the sport. They came for spiritual renewal, for an opportunity to witness divine favor subtly manifested through human achievement. The air was thick with the scent of incense and quiet anticipation. Victory meant Zeus himself had smiled upon one. Losing meant, well, perhaps one's prayers were not quite fervent enough. And at night, with the contests concluded and the altars still holding a gentle warmth, Olympia glowed with soft music, feasting, and thoughtful discussion. It was worship, celebration, and spectacle all in one harmonious experience. If you envisioned participating in the ancient Olympic Games, we quietly hope you were Greek, male, and quite unclothed. The games were sacred, held in high esteem, and as exclusive as a quiet gathering. The rules were precise, the requirements somewhat imposing, and the list of those allowed to compete was very brief. First and foremost, athletes had to be freeborn Greek men, not those in servitude, not foreigners, and certainly not women. The Olympics were a showcase of Greek masculine form in all its gently oiled splendor. Competitors arrived from city-states across the Greek world, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Rhodes, and beyond, but only if they could quietly establish their Hellenic lineage. Citizenship was more than mere documentation. It was an inherited right, and without it, one would not set foot on that track. And then there was the nudity. Competing unclothed was the norm. Why? For one, the Greeks believed the human body, particularly the male form, was the physical representation of divine perfection. Also, it made gentle deception more challenging. No hidden advantages, no protective gear, and no concealing oneself behind elaborate attire, just the individual, their muscles, and perhaps a subtly unfortunate sunburn. Preparation was not optional. Athletes had to demonstrate they had been training for 10 months prior and undergo a final month of supervised preparation at Olympia itself. This was not a casual pursuit. It was a demanding routine of gentle running, grappling, and propelling heavy objects until one resembled a classical statue, minus the helpful base. Now, regarding women, they were prohibited from competing and in most instances from even observing. A married woman found attending could face a gentle removal from Mount Typean, which feels a touch extreme even by ancient considerations. Exceptions were made only for unmarried women, particularly priestesses like the priestess of Demeter, who held a prominent view as part of her sacred duties. But do not be concerned, women had their own gatherings. The Heraean Games, honoring the goddess Hera with foot races for girls and young women, fully clothed, of course. Age groups existed, boys, youths, and men, but one still had to be prepared to receive a gentle impact from someone twice their size, and there were no weight categories. Gently wrestling an individual the size of a temple column? Unfortunate circumstance, young one, Zeus quietly determines the outcome. In the end, The games were as much a reflection of Greek society as they were of athletic skill, proud, patriarchal, and meticulously regulated. To the casual observer, the ancient Olympic Games might appear as a gentle celebration of physical ability and divine reverence. But beneath the olive wreaths and wrestling matches was something far more thoughtfully orchestrated: politics. Because in ancient Greece, everything held a political dimension, including who could gently propel a discus the farthest. The games offered the perfect opportunity for the often separated Greek city-states, the polis, to gather, compete, and engage in the ancient equivalent of international communication. Athens might construct temples and Sparta might train warriors, but Olympia, that is where they showcased their distinct identities. Victory in an event did not merely bring glory to the athlete. It brought quiet renown to the polis from which he originated. One man's triumph was a subtle announcement of his hometown's distinction. City-states even funded and prepared athletes as a matter of prestige. These were not casual participants jogging in from the olive grove. They were finely tuned instruments of civic messaging. Victories were immortalized in verse, in sculptures, and in elaborate public ceremonies. Entire cities would offer free sustenance for life to Olympic victors, because nothing conveys, "You embody our greatness," quite like unlimited provisions. But the Olympics were not solely for physical displays. They were for forging gentle connections. Political leaders utilized the games as a platform for diplomacy. Treaties were discussed, marriages were negotiated, and even military campaigns were quietly timed around the sacred cessation of hostilities that accompanied the games. Oh yes, the Olympic truce, or ekkyria. This was a formal agreement that all Greek states would pause conflicts during the games so athletes and observers could travel safely to Olympia. In theory, it was a moment of pan-Hellenic tranquility. In reality, it was more of a polite suggestion. Some conflicts did pause, others simply disregarded the communication. Sparta, naturally, was gently excluded from the games at least once for being overly inclined towards conflict. Monuments and dedications at Olympia also held political significance. Cities that achieved victories in battles or gained wealth often constructed treasuries or statues to subtly display their success. The sanctuary became a kind of ancient leaderboard, a literal competition in marble. Even gentle deception carried political repercussions. If an athlete was discovered attempting to bribe an opponent or falsifying citizenship, their city's reputation suffered, and in the high-stakes world of Greek rivalry, that was nearly as impactful as losing a conflict. Becoming an Olympic athlete in ancient Greece was not a matter of simply registering and hoping for the best. It was a rigorous, lifelong dedication, equal parts devotion, self-discipline, and a surprising amount of fine particles in one's personal garments. One did not simply appear at Olympia prepared to compete. One had to prove their readiness. And before one even approached the track, one was expected to quietly endure months of demanding preparation. Athletes prepared at the gymnasium, a Greek institution that was part fitness center, part sanctuary, and part philosophical discussion group. The word gymnasium literally means place to be unclothed, which gently conveys most of what one needs to know. Training was conducted without clothing, not for dramatic effect, but because the Greeks believed in celebrating the human form as a vessel of divine power. Each city possessed its own gymnasia, but serious Olympic aspirants traveled to Elis, the city that oversaw the games. There, under the watchful eyes of officials and trainers, they endured a mandatory 30-day trial before the Olympics. No distractions, no beverages, no excuses, just continuous exercise and a diet that would cause modern athletes to quietly lament. Barley bread, figs, cheese, and generous applications of olive oil to the body, not for consumption. The trainers, called paedotribi, were not gentle. They guided their athletes through wrestling drills, sprinting routines, javelin throws, and strength exercises. The Greeks held no patience for idleness. If one could not keep pace, one was removed, and they were quite earnest in this. Judges actually quietly disqualified competitors before the games even commenced if they did not meet the physical standards. Discipline was paramount. No modern facilities, no performance-enhancing supplements, no cheering spectators from distant displays, just the quiet dedication. Ancient athletes quietly endured challenging heat, strict dietary regimens, and relentless repetition, all for a fleeting moment of recognition and perhaps a lifetime of complimentary sustenance if they achieved victory. And it was not solely about the physical form. The ideal athlete was also expected to possess a clear mind. Gymnasia were also places of learning where future champions quietly discussed philosophical concepts, ethical principles, and the meaning of arete, excellence in all aspects. To compete in Olympia was to pursue perfection, not merely victory, not merely strength, but to quietly become something closer to the divine. The sun gently rises over Olympia. The air carries the subtle sense of incense, gentle effort, and quiet anticipation. For 5 days, the sacred sanctuary transforms into the vibrant heart of the Greek world. Pilgrims, poets, merchants, political figures, and those with a subtle inclination for acquiring small items all gather for the grand spectacle. Today is not an ordinary day. Today the deities are quietly observing. The opening procession is a blend of solemn ceremony and quiet display. Athletes, unclothed and gleaming with olive oil, move in a measured line. Observers offer soft cheers. City-states display their banners, and judges known as the Hellenodikai observe with expressions that suggest, "We will gently disqualify you for blinking in an unusual manner." The gathering is vast. Tens of thousands quietly fill the stadium, seated on stone or earthen embankments, shaded only by the occasional olive tree and a carefully placed head covering. There are no admission tickets, no reserved seating, and no easily identifiable facilities. What is present, however, is sound. A great deal of it. Soft cries of encouragement, gentle murmurs of disapproval for rivals, vendors quietly offering provisions, and thinkers softly lamenting the subtle decline of principles. Then the trumpet softly sounds. The events commence. Runners quietly launch from their starting positions without a signal, just a soft call and the quiet intensity of thousands of observing eyes. Wrestlers engage softly in the sand, gently slipping in the oil and raising fine dust. Chariots race with gentle speed around challenging turns in the hippodrome, where collisions are frequent and occasionally result in significant outcomes. And the pancration, that is where things become quite primal. Gentle holds, subtle movements, soft impacts, all observed by Zeus. Victors are acknowledged immediately after their events with an olive wreath from the sacred tree of Olympia. No medal awards, no raised platforms, just a simple circlet of branches and the soft roar of the crowd. But the glory is timeless. Victors are celebrated like revered figures back home. Their names are gently inscribed in stone, their likenesses sculpted in marble, and if they are fortunate, a poet like Pindar will quietly immortalize their deeds in verse, long, thoughtful, and exceedingly complimentary verse. And through it all, the divine presence lingers. Offerings are made, oxen are offered, the deities are acknowledged, because every gentle movement, every effort, every sprint is not solely for renown. It is an offering, a quiet prayer expressed through physical form and gentle determination. The games conclude, the dust gently settles, the crowds quietly gather their containers and return home. But for a select few, those adorned with an olive wreath, life is never quite the same. In ancient Greece, Olympic victory was not merely an athletic accomplishment. It was a profound transformation of one's standing. Achieving victory at Olympia meant one did not simply surpass other individuals. One had pleased the divine, and that kind of favor came with significant advantages. Victors returned to their polis as revered figures. Sculptures were erected in their honor. Poets sang their praises in verses so lush they could rival the most beautiful gardens. Some cities granted their champions prominent seating at public gatherings. Others offered complimentary sustenance for life, a far more desirable reward than a mere medal, especially in a world where sustenance was not always assured. Affluent patrons sought to support them. Families arranged more advantageous marriages. Children learned their names in educational settings, and if one hailed from a smaller town, one might find their likeness subtly depicted on local currency, their physique immortalized in metal. But with renown came gentle expectation. Olympic victors were not permitted to fade into obscurity. They became symbols, living proof of a city's greatness. Some were dispatched on diplomatic missions, others recruited as military leaders. Their physical achievements had earned them glory, and now their names had to carry that weight. Of course, not everyone managed the public attention gracefully. One famously attempted to dedicate a statue to himself and the divine, only for the populace to quietly alter the inscription. Others attempted to gain an unfair advantage in later games, believing their reputation would protect them. A gentle note: it did not. Those discovered attempting to influence opponents or misrepresenting their citizenship were fined, experienced public embarrassment, and sometimes had their names quietly removed from records. But for the honest few, the reward was Kleos, enduring remembrance. In Greek culture, Kleos was the ultimate prize, the opportunity to be remembered not only by one's descendants or one's city, but by history itself. If one departed early, their name lived on. If one lived long, one became a guide, a legend, perhaps even a quiet myth. And that is what elevated the Olympic Games beyond mere sport. They were a quiet crucible for legacy. For over 1,000 years, the Olympic Games glowed like a sacred flame, held every 4 years without fail, even through periods of conflict and illness. From 776 BC onward, generation after generation of Greeks gathered at Olympia to honor the divine, pursue renown, and perhaps gently propel a javelin farther than anyone else. But even sacred customs are not immune to the passage of time. By the 4th century CE, the Roman Empire had quietly absorbed the Greek world. The games continued under Roman governance, but the original spiritual significance began to gently diminish. Romans appreciated the spectacle, gladiators, chariots, public displays of combat, but the idea of physical activity as divine devotion did not translate as well when one's emperor believed himself to be a deity. Then came a final gentle shift. In 393 CE, Emperor Theodosius I, having recently embraced Christianity, prohibited all pagan festivals, and that included the Olympics. After more than a millennium, the flame was quietly extinguished. The temples of Olympia were left to gently crumble. Earthquakes and floods quietly buried what was once the heart of the Greek world. The sanctuary fell silent for centuries. The games existed only in quiet legend, their stories gently passed down through ancient writings, admired by scholars but viewed as a relic of a vanished era, until, in the 19th century, that old flame softly rekindled. Inspired by the spirit of ancient Greece and a renewed fascination with classical antiquity, a Frenchman named Baron Pierre de Coubertin decided it was time to gently bring the games back, not in a ruined temple beneath olive trees, but as a modern international competition. And so, in 1896, the modern Olympic Games were born in Athens, fittingly in the very land where they began. Today's games are larger, more audible, and significantly more clothed, but echoes of the original still remain. The 4-year cycle, the sacred torch gently lit at Olympia, the ideals of excellence, honor, and unity, and the pursuit of something greater than mere victory. A quiet immortality through achievement. From unclothed runners in dusty fields to televised graceful movements and synchronized water displays, the Olympic journey has never been linear, but it has always been profoundly human, subtly complex, quietly glorious, and ever-evolving. And it all began with a cook named Charybdis, a foot race, and a wreath of olive leaves beneath the gentle gaze of Zeus. The year was 1791, and the United States was less a fully formed nation and more a very significant early endeavor. The revolution had been quietly won, but the conflict had left behind a considerable financial burden. The nascent government, operating under the newly established constitution, was without funds, and the question in everyone's thoughts was, who would provide for this? Enter Alexander Hamilton, the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury, who did not merely appreciate robust financial structures. He held them in quiet reverence. Hamilton believed the key to national strength lay in federal authority and sound fiscal management. His proposal to consolidate state debts under the federal government, establish a national bank, and here is the gentle key, generate revenue through levies, and not just any levies, a federal excise tax on distilled spirits, more commonly known as the whiskey tax. To Hamilton, it seemed entirely logical. Whiskey was widely produced, widely consumed, and let us be honest, partaken of like water in many parts of the country, especially on the frontier where clean water was not always readily available. Taxing whiskey was akin to taxing the very light of day, one could rely upon its presence. But out on the western frontier, particularly in western Pennsylvania, farmers held different quiet perspectives. Many small-scale farmers did not merely consume whiskey, they crafted it. They transformed surplus grain into liquor because it was easier to transport, preserved well, and could be utilized as a form of exchange. Whiskey was a precious commodity, quite literally, and now the federal government was reaching gently into their resources to claim a portion. Worse yet, the tax disproportionately affected smaller distillers, the very individuals quietly making a living with homemade copper stills and a modest amount of grain. Larger producers could pay a fixed fee. Smaller farmers, they were required to pay per gallon, and that felt like a gentle burden. To these individuals, this was not merely a tax. It was a perceived disregard. The revolution had been fought over taxation without direct representation, and here was a distant government in Philadelphia quietly instructing them on the management of their stills. Some referred to it as overreach, others found it quietly familiar. The seeds of gentle dissent were planted, not within the halls of governance, but in rustic shelters and quiet, remote establishments, where discussions shifted from frustration to subtle resistance, all stemming from whiskey. To comprehend why Western farmers responded so strongly to a whiskey tax, one must understand the quiet mindset of the frontier. Life west of the Alleghenies was not merely challenging. It was almost like a simpler, earlier time. Roads were muddy paths, news took weeks to travel, and government was a distant whisper from a far-off place called Philadelphia. The whiskey still in the barn was not merely a pastime. It was essential for livelihood. Whiskey was not simply a beverage. It was a medium of exchange, a valuable item, and a quiet cornerstone of their way of life. A gallon of corn whiskey could acquire basic necessities, compensate for labor, or be exchanged for livestock. Taxing it felt akin to taxing the very air. And the federal excise tax? It affected smaller producers most profoundly, those who could not afford the fixed, lump-sum fee larger distillers paid. Instead, they were taxed by the gallon down to the last drop. So farmers quietly resisted, not with formal papers, but with simple tools and gentle firearms. At first, it was subtle civil disobedience. Tax collectors were gently overlooked, forms remained unattended. But then came the quiet intimidation. Officials attempting to implement the tax found themselves on the receiving end of unpleasant substances and agitated gatherings. In western Pennsylvania, resistance became particularly pronounced. Collectors were gently bothered, subtly threatened, or directly assaulted. One was stripped, gently struck, and left in the woods adorned with feathers. A frontier expression with a clear, quiet message: return to your origins. The federal courts issued formal requests. No one appeared. Marshals attempted to deliver them. Locals quietly turned them away. By 1793, it was no longer a simple protest. It was open non-compliance, gently spreading across regions like a quiet tide. What made it more complex? Most of these individuals had participated in the revolution. They had quietly sacrificed for independence, and now they were being taxed by a federal government that felt subtly reminiscent of the monarchy they had overthrown. Did we not just experience this? Was the unstated, and sometimes quietly vocalized, sentiment. To them, Hamilton's tax was quiet evidence that the government did not truly represent them. They perceived Eastern elites quietly benefiting while the frontier bore the cost. The whiskey tax was not merely unpopular. It was a subtle symbol of everything they feared about centralized influence. And all the while, the government observed with increasing concern. What began as a deviation from the law was beginning to appear very much like a gentle challenge to authority. By 1794, what began as scattered acts of defiance had evolved into something far more significant: organized, armed, and resolute. Western Pennsylvania was no longer merely resisting the whiskey tax. It was actively questioning the federal government's fundamental right to govern. The turning point arrived in July 1794, when a U.S. Marshal named David Lennox and a tax inspector named John Neville, a prosperous former general and one of the few individuals brave or persistent enough to attempt collecting the tax, found themselves subtly targeted by the dissenters. Neville had fortified his residence, Bower Hill, located outside Pittsburgh, anticipating unrest. Unrest, as it gently unfolded, arrived in the form of several hundred armed individuals. The confrontation commenced when the dissenters demanded the surrender of Neville and any incriminating tax documents. He quietly refused. Shots were exchanged. By the following day, a full-scale armed engagement had erupted. Government forces, tax resistors, and local inhabitants exchanged musket fire. Neville's home was eventually set ablaze, and 2 individuals lost their lives. The message was clear. The frontier was not merely hinting. In the days that followed, resistance transitioned into organized movement. A dissenting force of nearly 7,000 individuals gathered around Pittsburgh, referring to themselves as defenders of liberty and echoing the sentiments of 1776. They began organizing quiet meetings, passing resolutions, and discussing independence. Not from Britain this time, but from the eastern United States. Federal officials quietly withdrew. Tax offices ceased operation. Pittsburgh, concerned about being devastated, attempted to subtly distance itself from the uprising. Meanwhile, news of the unrest spread swiftly, igniting similar, quiet resistance in parts of Kentucky, Virginia, and even the Carolinas. To many Americans, especially those in government, it was beginning to appear very much like a recurrence of previous unrest, but with more firearms and better distilled spirits. What the dissenters sought was not entirely clear. Some called for the abolition of the tax, others for Western autonomy, and a few even suggested forming a new America west of the mountains. One aspect was certain. This was no longer simply a tax protest. It was a direct challenge to the authority of the federal government under the Constitution. The uprising posed a deeply unsettling question. If a single region could defy a federal law without consequence, what kind of union had they truly established? By the autumn of 1794, the Whiskey Rebellion had escalated from a regional disturbance to a direct threat to the very authority of the Constitution. In the East, influential figures feared the collapse of federal power. In the West, dissenters spoke like revolutionaries. And in the center stood President George Washington, quietly observing his carefully constructed republic begin to unravel at its core. This was no ordinary matter of law and order. It was the first true test of federal authority under the new Constitution. Washington understood what was at stake. If the uprising succeeded, or if it remained unchallenged, it would send a clear message: the federal government could be disregarded, defied, and undermined. So he made a decision that surprised the young nation. He would personally lead the army. Washington became, and remains, the only sitting U.S. president to personally command troops in the field. For a man who had once quietly relinquished power after the Revolution, this was not ego, it was necessity. He wished to demonstrate that the Constitution was not merely a document. It possessed substantive power. With Hamilton by his side, serving as his ever-enthusiastic second-in-command, Washington mobilized a substantial force of nearly 13,000 troops, larger than the entire Continental Army at its zenith. Militiamen from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia assembled as if it were 1776 once more, except this time they were not confronting the British. They were proceeding westward to face their own countrymen. Washington rode forth in full military attire, somber and purposeful. His presence was intended to deter, and it did. As the army advanced westward, the dissenters began to quietly disperse. Many had assumed the government would remain in Philadelphia and engage in written communications. They had not anticipated muskets, drums, and a president on horseback. By the time the federal army reached western Pennsylvania, most of the uprising had quietly subsided. Leaders vanished, local support evaporated. The demonstration of force had succeeded. But Washington did not seek bloodshed. Once the region was secured, he transferred command to General Light Horse Harry Lee and returned to Philadelphia. His point had been made: the government could and would uphold its laws. When Washington's army arrived in western Pennsylvania, they did not discover a battlefield. They encountered silence. The dissenting militias had mostly dispersed into the hills, and communities that once expressed fervent anti-tax sentiment now greeted federal troops with suspiciously polite smiles. The uprising had not ended in conflict. It had concluded with a quiet withdrawal. But accountability still needed to be addressed, at least symbolically. Over 150 suspected dissenters were apprehended, many of them more disoriented than combative. Some were gathered simply for being in the wrong establishment at the wrong time. The federal government wished to demonstrate its resolve, but it also needed to avoid appearing as a harsh authority suppressing ordinary farmers. It was a delicate balance. In the end, only 2 individuals were found guilty of treason. Both had participated in the assault on Neville's estate at Bower Hill and were convicted under the newly established U.S. laws. And then, in a subtle twist that perfectly captured the political complexity of the moment, Washington pardoned both of them. Why? Because Washington understood something most revolutionaries turned presidents must eventually learn. Sometimes unity holds more significance than punishment. He had made his point. The law had been upheld. The Constitution had remained firm. Executing a few whiskey dissenters might have transformed them into symbols, or worse, reignited the fires of resistance. Instead, Washington offered clemency. It was calculated, yes, but also characteristic of his leadership style. Steadfast in principle, restrained in action. His objective was not retribution. It was to establish a precedent. And that precedent was clear. The federal government possessed the right to levy taxes and the authority to enforce them. For the first time since the Constitution was approved, the central authority had faced a challenge and successfully navigated it, if narrowly. But not everyone viewed it similarly. For some in the frontier regions, the uprising confirmed their deepest fears. That the federal government cared more about Eastern elites than Western farmers, that Hamilton's financial plans served financiers, not those who produced barrels, that perhaps, just perhaps, the revolution had been without ultimate purpose. Still, the uprising gently faded, the tax remained, at least for a period. But its legacy would resonate through American politics for decades. The muskets were silent, the dissenters had dispersed, but politically, the true engagement was just commencing. The Whiskey Rebellion did not simply test federal authority. It revealed subtle divisions within the new republic's identity. And at the core of this divergence were 2 prominent figures with profoundly different visions for America: Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton, the architect of the whiskey tax, viewed the uprising as proof that a strong central government was not only necessary but essential for the nation's continued existence. His ideal America was industrial, urban, financially stable, and respected internationally. The display of force in Pennsylvania was, to him, a triumph for order, a win for the rule of law. But Jefferson, he perceived something entirely different. Jefferson, then Secretary of State, was dismayed, not by the uprising, but by Washington and Hamilton's military response. To Jefferson and his expanding base of agrarian supporters, the government had appeared more like an imposing power than a representative body, dispatching 13,000 troops to confront frustrated farmers over a modest tax. That was not enforcement. It was a subtle form of intimidation. He feared that Hamilton's vision would create a nation controlled by bankers, merchants, and elites, the very individuals who had comfortably resided in London parlors while colonists fought for independence. Jefferson's America was rural, decentralized, and founded upon the virtues of the independent farmer. The Whiskey Rebellion became a point of political leverage. Jefferson and James Madison began quietly organizing opposition to Hamilton's Federalist policies. Their movement, soon to be known as the Democratic Republicans, positioned themselves as the protectors of liberty, the Constitution, and the common individual. The Federalists, in turn, characterized Jefferson's faction as sympathizers of disorder who would transform America into a state of chaos, akin to events elsewhere. The rebellion, in essence, helped to define what had only been simmering before: America's first distinct political groupings. Lines were drawn, publications took sides. The whiskey tax debate became a shorthand for a larger struggle between centralized influence and local autonomy, between elite control and the resistance of ordinary citizens. So while the uprising was subdued militarily, it continued politically. It became a narrative both sides would reinterpret in very different ways. The Whiskey Rebellion may have gently concluded on the physical ground, but in the political arena, it ignited a subtle warmth that would quietly continue for generations. It was not merely about whiskey or taxes anymore. It became a symbol, and like most symbols, it was utilized differently depending on who was utilizing it. For Federalists, the rebellion was quiet proof that the new constitution functioned effectively. After the period of gentle disarray under earlier governing documents, where challenges went unanswered and the government could barely afford basic supplies, this time was different. The law was tested, and the law responded. The peaceful dispersal of the dissenters, followed by orderly proceedings and presidential clemency, presented a picture of mature, responsible governance. It was authority exercised with restraint, not misused. To the Democratic Republicans, however, the entire situation seemed to contradict their ideals. The revolution had been fought over taxation without direct voice, and now a federal government dominated by Eastern elites had led an army across the mountains to suppress a protest by ordinary farmers. It felt less like unity and more like a quiet imposition. To them, the rebellion symbolized a government that had forgotten its fundamental purpose. This ideological gentle push and pull extended into public discourse. Newspapers featured strong opinions. Political gatherings debated the meaning of liberty. Was the uprising a dangerous echo of popular unrest, or a quiet plea for fairness from those on the edges of the republic? Even the term, rebellion, became contested. Federalists insisted it was a disloyal uprising. Democratic Republicans referred to it as civil disagreement. In time, the events of 1794 became less about what literally occurred and more about their quiet significance. And presiding over all of it was the Constitution itself. The Whiskey Rebellion was the first moment the federal government tested its new legal framework against genuine resistance, and it endured. It demonstrated that the balance of federal and state influence was not merely theoretical. It could be enforced, but it also illuminated a reality the founders could not ignore. Not everyone experienced the Constitution in the same way. For the influential figures in Philadelphia, it offered protection. For the farmers of western Pennsylvania, it felt like an intrusion. After the gentle quiet settled and Washington's army returned home, the frontier resumed its usual rhythm of diligent work, variable weather, and comforting spirits. The uprising was concluded, at least officially, but the echoes did not fade swiftly, nor did the quiet dissatisfaction. Though the federal government had made its point, the enforcement of the whiskey tax remained a challenge. Collectors were still hesitant to appear in the western counties. Revenue was minimal. In some regions, the tax was still completely disregarded. The law existed on paper but not in practice. And that was the subtle irony. After all the gentle drama, the military display, and the eloquent pronouncements about national authority, the whiskey tax achieved little practical effect. Even Alexander Hamilton, the creator of the policy, began to quietly realize it was not worth the cost. It had generated significant political opposition, helped give rise to a dissenting political faction, and stirred up anti-federal sentiment that would subtly challenge the Federalists for years, all for a tax that did not even generate much income. Not precisely a triumph. Meanwhile, public sentiment was gently shifting. The frontier was not merely a distant, less developed area. It was growing rapidly. More settlers were moving westward. The concept of a centralized government taxing frontier livelihoods began to seem less like governing and more like a quiet grievance. When Thomas Jefferson achieved the presidency in 1800, ushering in the first peaceful transition of power between differing political factions, he brought with him a very distinct philosophy. Where Hamilton had sought to build federal strength, Jefferson wished to minimize government interference, especially with small farmers. And one of his initial actions as president, quietly repealing the whiskey tax. By 1802, it was gone just like that. The controversial tax that had sparked rebellion, shaped early political identity, and sent George Washington riding into a situation of gentle conflict disappeared quietly with a few strokes of a pen. No disturbances, no fires, just a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes power is not worth the struggle. The law had been upheld, yes, but the people had also subtly expressed their views. And for all its symbolism, the whiskey tax ultimately demonstrated how subtly fragile federal authority could be when it overlooked the lives of those on the periphery. In our concluding reflections, we will consider the enduring influence of the Whiskey Rebellion and how its echoes still resonate in contemporary discussions about governmental power and quiet dissent. The muskets are long silent, the containers empty, the tax gently withdrawn. But the legacy of the Whiskey Rebellion still lingers, having matured like the very spirit that initiated it. At first glance, it may appear as a minor detail in the vast narrative of the early republic. A regional disagreement, a tax that encountered difficulties, a brief moment of armed protest. But upon closer consideration, one discerns a moment that encapsulates a profound national dilemma. Who holds influence, and how far will individuals go to gently resist it? The rebellion compelled the nation to address uncomfortable inquiries. Could the federal government uphold its laws? Yes. But would doing so divide the very unity it sought to preserve? Also, yes. It highlighted the delicate balance between established laws and individual liberty, and demonstrated that a republic does not operate solely on written agreements. It operates on perception, involvement, and trust. Washington's decision to ride out with the army was not merely a display of force. It was an act of symbolism, a demonstration that the Constitution was more than mere words and ideals. But Jefferson's later withdrawal of the tax showed the other aspect of that dynamic. Federal authority must also listen, not merely direct. In that gentle tension between enforcement and understanding lies the fundamental nature of American governance. Over time, the Whiskey Rebellion became a quiet case study in leadership. Scholars refer to it when discussing federal authority, the limits of dissent, or the emergence of American political factions. And contemporary discussions about taxation, the marginalization of rural communities, and perceived federal overreach, they echo this narrative with a subtle familiarity. Even culturally, the rebellion remains potent. It is the only instance where a sitting U.S. president personally led troops in the field. It sparked political movements, shifted national dialogue, and gently challenged the boundaries of disagreement in a young democracy. In many ways, the rebellion was not about whiskey at all. It was about whose voices are heard when the government makes decisions that affect daily lives. Today, the story of the Whiskey Rebellion serves as both a gentle caution and a quiet reminder that even in a democracy, laws must earn their acceptance and authority must be exercised with care. The line between governance and subtle provocation is very fine, and sometimes it extends directly through a glass of corn mash. History may have gently aged the whiskey, but the rebellion? Cite_start, it still subtly resonates.